The last basic algebra concept we want to talk about is the idea of graphically representing the values of our variables. Now, when we're talking about a single variable, we can graphically represent the value of a single variable, but it's not especially interesting. So, for example, we can have a number line and represent x equals 2 by putting a dot on our number line at 2. But at least for single values of a single variable, that just doesn't give us any interesting information. Things get much more interesting when we're talking about two variables. Now, to represent two variables visually, we'll use two number lines drawn at right angles to each other. So here we have a horizontal number line called the x-axis and a vertical number line called the y-axis. Together, we have two axes, and a plane labeled with two axes is called a coordinate plane. What we mean by that is that every point on this plane has a pair of coordinates. Here we're looking at the point 2, -3. That means that it's 2 units to the right of the 0 point, and it's 3 units below, again, the 0 point. So that's the point 2, -3. And notice that that corresponds to the 2 on the x-axis, the -3 on the y-axis. Now notice we've actually written the letter x on the x-axis. We've written the letter y on the y-axis. If our variables are not named x and y, when we write an ordered pair, the first number shows the number on the horizontal axis. The second number shows the value on the vertical axis. So if our variables are not named x and y, it's always going to be horizontal first, vertical second. Left and right first, up and down second. So I told you that that's the point 2, -3, and I drew these dotted lines and these distances to help us see that. But in general, if we're going to actually try to draw something on a coordinate plane, or read really clearly the coordinates of a point on the coordinate plane, we're going to draw in grid lines. So we have a series of vertical lines where every point on the vertical line has the same x coordinate. So referring to our example point 2, -3, that's on the vertical line labeled with a 2 on the x-axis. And it's on the horizontal line labeled with a -3 on the y-axis. So the vertical grid lines are labeled with the x coordinate. The horizontal grid lines are labeled with the y coordinate. When we go to plot a point on a coordinate plane, then, we'll use the labels on the horizontal and vertical grid lines to figure out where our point is. The word we use for drawing a point at a certain position is plotting the point. So we want to draw the point 4, 1. We find the 4 on the x-axis. So we want to be somewhere on this vertical line. We find the 1 on the y-axis. We want to be somewhere on this horizontal line. The place where we cross is this point. So this is the point 4, 1. If we want to draw the point -2, 3, we find the -2 on the x-axis, so somewhere on this vertical line. We find the 3 on the y-axis, so somewhere on this horizontal line. This is the place where those cross, so this is the point -2, 3. Finally, if we want to plot the point 0, -2, well, we find the 0 on the x-axis. The place where the axes cross is 0 on both axes. So if our x-coordinate is 0, that means we're somewhere on the y-axis. We find the -2 on the y-axis, so we're somewhere on this horizontal line. This must be the point 0, -2. And notice that in drawing this graph, we were looking at the labels on the axes. We were reading the labels rather than counting out spaces. And the reason for that is we don't necessarily have to count by ones when we label our axes. In this next example, we have a set of axes again, but notice on the y-axis we're counting by 5s. On the x-axis, we're counting by a half. So when we want to figure out the coordinates of these points, we can't just count how many squares away from 0 we are. We have to see how our grid lines are labeled. So looking at this point first, we see this vertical line is through the 2 on the x-axis. So our x-coordinate is 2. And then the horizontal line through that point goes through the 15 on the y-axis. So our vertical coordinate is 15. Looking at this point next, we see the vertical line goes through the -1 on the x-axis. So our x-coordinate is -1. The horizontal line goes through the 10 on the y-axis. So our y-coordinate is 10. That's the point -1, 10. Let's see. We'll look at this point next. We see that this is at the 1.5 on the x-axis. And it's going through the 0 on the y-axis. So this must be the point 1.5, 0. And I'm using a mixed number here because the labels on my axis are mixed numbers. If the labels on my axis were improper fractions, I would use an improper fraction. If the labels on my axis were decimals, I would use decimals. I'm just using the same kind of numbers that I have in the labels on my axis. Okay, our last point is this one. We see it's on the vertical line that goes through a half. So the x-coordinate is a half. And then it's on the horizontal line through -20. The y-coordinate is -20. Notice that while the x-axis is allowed to have different spacing than the y-axis, each axis should have the same spacing along its entire length. So it wouldn't make sense to count by 5s above the x-axis and then count by 10s below the x-axis, for example. Our x-axis has spacing of 1/2 all the way along its length. Our y-axis has spacing of 5 all the way along its length.